A new survey has found housing affordability is one of the biggest problems facing low-income earners.
The report from the Australian Council of Social Services says the crisis is having a devastating impact on people's lives. To tell us more, we're joined by ACOSS's Deputy Chief Executive, Tessa Caine. Tessa Caine, good morning and thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
This is the annual survey of more than 500 agencies and it shows that housing is the real pressure point.
That's right. This report is incredibly concerning because it shows that social services really are at crisis point in terms of their capacity to meet the level of need in our community. Numbers of people turning to social services are growing, but so too is the complexity of their needs, and our community sector simply cannot meet that level of demand. So while it's starkest for housing and homelessness services, those are closely followed by legal services, by youth, by mental health services, by domestic violence and by emergency relief services.
Why are they under pressure generally?
Look, we are seeing increasing numbers of clients and we're not necessarily seeing increasing funding or greater availability of services for those needs. But I think the complexity is a really stark finding of this year's survey. So housing and particularly the availability of affordable housing was identified as the #1 priority, not just by housing and homelessness services, but across the community sector. Once you can't guarantee someone has secure and affordable housing, it's very difficult to ensure that they're able to meet the requirements of paid employment, to be able to support their family, to be able to pay the bills that they need to keep going.
Employment and the nature of the employment that people do or don't have seems to be key as well, because according to your report, almost 80% of people presenting to the housing and homeless services were wholly reliant on income support payments. Wholly reliant, so no other income coming into the family at all. Why is that?
That's right. We know that that's the case for many services, that they have large client groups fully reliant on income support payments. And of course, at their base level, the New Start allowance is only $35 a day. So if we put that in context, for a single person on the New Start allowance, they can earn up to $400 a week. Most people on income support payments are in the private rental market. We know that rents in the capital cities, certainly on the East Coast, are between $360 and $470 per week. So a person on the New Start allowance cannot even afford to pay that rent, let alone have money left over for food, for transport, for medical bills. It's simply not enough to live on. And the other key thing that we know about people on the New Start allowance is that more than 60% of them are on it for over a year. So we're not talking about a short period of time to tide someone over. We are talking about the basic levels of income for large numbers of people.
Well, the argument of the government was that if you make the New Start or those social service payments small enough, then it encourages people to get out there and actually get a job and get some more money into the household. Why is that not happening?
Look, ACOSS would be amongst the first to say the most important way to secure the adequate income for people is through paid work. But the reality is that jobs are not necessarily there and they're not necessarily able to be met by many of these people. So we're talking about large numbers of people who might be sole parents, so they have significant caring responsibilities. Their ability to work requires on flexibility around school hours. We're talking about large numbers of people who are living with a disability and who want to work but who need to find employers that can support them, not just to get a job but to keep it. And we're also talking about large numbers of people who are over 40 years of age and who are facing very serious discrimination in terms of the workforce.
Well, just while we're on this subject, and just briefly, just to get ACOSS's view on the record, then where does ACOSS stand on changes to 457 visas? Do you believe that if that was tightened up, that more opportunities might flow to locals?
Look, there's a very important discussion to have around the employment market and particularly around how we support people in Australia who need jobs and who are able to access them. One of the key things that we're finding is that the availability of work and the people looking for work are not necessarily a match. So ACOSS is working with employer groups, with business groups and with trade unions around that agenda. But in the meantime, our biggest concern in the report today is that people living in a serious condition of poverty are not able to get the level of support that they need to alleviate that poverty and to make ends meet.
Sure, and we're discussing that and I'm happy to go back to it, but just so we don't labour the point too much, can I get a direct answer on that? Does ACOSS have a view on whether it would be a good or a bad thing, or do you not have a view at all on the 457 visa changes?
Look, we think migration is an incredibly important part of our labour market and of how we ensure that Australia has the workforce that we need to meet the challenges now and into the future. So we're certainly happy to have that debate, but we're also keen to make sure that while we're talking about the level of need in the community, we're keeping a close eye on what social services need to meet that need.
Do you believe that the federal government understands just how under-resourced many of these services are and how much how much money and when they actually need they need this cash in order to boost what they can do for the community?
Look, part of the problem is around funding for services. We know that even for government-funded services, many of the costs of delivering those services are not fully funded. But there's a large part of the work done by this sector that relies on non-government sources of funding, significant levels of giving, of philanthropic support, of donation. And we know that those levels of giving have not returned to pre-GFC levels. So we are facing a sector that has significantly reduced levels of funding at the same time as it faces greater levels of need. I think the other part of the picture is what are we doing as a nation to support people out of poverty, and that's where the availability of affordable housing and addressing issues like the very low levels of income support payment are absolutely critical if we're to start truly alleviating poverty.